Hi everyone, my name is Paul Kelly, and today we're going to be talking about the future of cyber risk quantification. With me, I have Gaurav, who is the CEO of Balbix. Also, we have Kavitha, who's the global head of cyber risk and data privacy at TCS. And I'm really keen to hear both of their views on where are we going with this in the future. So just a sort of opening question to sort of set the scene. Why do we see that company leaders are now looking to quantify their cyber risk? Kavitha, you're the closest. What's your experience of quantifying cyber risk at the moment?
So what we've seen so far is sticking to the old legacy of doing on an ongoing basis at regular intervals risk assessment. And after the risk assessment, we do a risk scoring and categorize them into high, medium, and low. And based on the priority, we mitigate the risk, and that has been a cycle on and off. But then there came a point where the senior management was unable to understand there are 1,000 risks and 1,000 priorities. Where do you want us to invest? How do you ensure which is more priority for our business and how much I have to invest? There's a big question mark which the organizations or the stakeholders were not able to justify. That's when there is a need that is booming in the market, of quantifying the risks on a day-to-day basis, whatever we are working on. And not only on quantifying the risk, there is another key requirement of why we need to quantify the risk. The first thing would be on the emerging risks and the trends in the market. The kind of data breaches or the cyber incidents are not anymore are rare. It's become a new normalcy wherever we are going to log into. The rise of ransomware specifically has made the data breaches more effective, and it has risen in the market for industries to think about how do I enable cybersecurity controls in my market or in my environment, and where do I invest appropriately. So having these different places where the requirements are falling in, and for us to take the right level of decision and a better decision, I would say the enterprise need to quantify the risk and showcase to their management or the CFO specifically, who has to authorize or approve the request. They have to know what is the the magnitude and what level of investment is required in the cyber area for us to invest and enable our functions.
I would broadly echo what Kavitha was saying. I think if you kind of look at progress, right? We want to make progress, and clearly there's nobody going around over here thinking that all's well in how we manage cybersecurity, how we manage cyber risk, right? So that's one thing. And when you kind of peel the onion back and say, why is that? You kind of arrive at two conclusions. One of them, obviously, which Kavitha mentioned, there's an increased complexity in the overall landscape, right? I mean, there's just too much stuff happening, too many different angles, too many different permutations and combinations of how bad things can happen. And you eventually get to the point where simple understanding is not possible. Now, when simple understanding breaks down, which I think it broke down about 5-6 years ago, that's when that grid that you have, that ceases to become a useful way of making decisions. Now, think about the average board meeting or the average meeting where the CFO is being briefed by the Chief Information Security Officer and the risk counterparts. They're not even speaking the same language. Obviously, cybersecurity is very complex, and CISOs are talking about, nitty-gritty details about things like Log4j. What does Log4j mean for an organization? Is it a $5 million thing, or is it a $500 million thing? Because if it's a $5 million thing, the CFO of a large corporation should be asking why we weren't talking about it. And if it's a $500 million thing, then you should summon an emergency board meeting and talk about, hey, our quarterly earnings are very likely going to be hit by $500 million, right? And that red, green, amber, rag chart that you have that had been our kind of cornerstone for deciding about cyber risk, that doesn't work anymore.
And what would you say the challenges are in really getting there now at the moment in order to get that information so that people can understand, the relevance of the risk to them and what they're going to spend their money on and whether the spending their money on is actually going to work? I mean, one of my pet hates, if you like, is we've got our 5-box grid and we're in the top right hand corner. And okay, well, what is it that's actually going to get me out the top right hand corner and move me further down towards the bottom left hand corner? And how much do I need to spend to move one box, and what things do I need to fix to get one box, and how quickly am I going to see the benefits? What's your view? I mean, what do you find as the sort of challenges in trying to portray that information?
So why it is difficult? First and foremost, the major challenge which is globally accepted by the organization is the awareness. Awareness, when I say the management is not aware of where to invest and how how efficient it is to address the current risks and challenges. When I say that, there are a lot of security tools that is available in the market. Whenever someone says this is going to reduce the risk and this is going to increase the scalability or availability of the applications, they just invest multiple tools in an environment, not knowing the end results or the benefits. So that's one key challenge I would definitely say, where the organizations are not able to understand where to invest, how to invest, and how to optimize their efforts. That's one thing. And the second is on the growing technology. There are emerging trends like be it IoT, AI, ML, or cloud computing. There are different technologies that is growing day by day. But what the industries or the organizations assume is, as the technology grows, we are secure in nature and there are now vulnerabilities prevailing. But that's a mindset that has to be clear. The challenges in that is, as the technology grows, the vulnerabilities are not an exception. I'll take cloud computing as an example. That cloud computing, whenever the organization is trying to move their on-prem to cloud, they assume when I'm going to move it from on-prem to cloud, it's completely secured, and the cloud service provider, be it Google or AWS, anyway, they're going to take care of the applications, and there's not going to be any incidents or issues that is going to arise. But that's a mindset that has to be clear, because as the technology grows, as I said, the vulnerabilities accompany them, and there are competing in nature, be it on-prem or cloud, the incidents are arising. So we have to ensure wherever the data is present, the security controls are enabled there, and we are in a position to quantify what level of controls are required, where do we have to invest, and what is the level of magnitude and level of impact to business if there is going to be any disruption or issues that is going to be raised in the threat landscape.
Gaurav, what are you seeing in the marketplace at the moment? When you talk to CFOs or CISOs, are you seeing similar issues?
So there is an adage: you can't improve what you can't measure. And that's where cyber risk quantification has started seeing all that. And we're seeing this across all industries, across all continents, all countries, all types of verticals, all types of layers, like even the director layer, as well as the CFO and everybody in the middle, CISO, of course. They are beginning to ask, fall behind and say, how can we use data and move into the 21st way of doing things?
In your experience, Kavitha, how do you see people trying to do this today?
Different teams come up with different dashboards, different reporting, with primarily focusing on the controls. They are very specific on is this a control aligning to or adhering to ISO 27001 or NIST, or they are very specific on mapping to the controls and doing a control mapping and seeing what is missing, and not looking beyond the control structure. First, they'll have to take that backseat and understand from the business risk standpoint. Analyze the data and see what is the cost and time required for investing the right controls in the right place, rather than mitigating the high, medium, and low risks that which is usually happening in today's world. At the end of the day, it is the numbers that play a key role, right? So we'll have to understand what is the right level of investment that is required for enabling or structuring this security, and address the business risk that is unforeseen, or which might affect our business in the forthcoming in upcoming technology that we are adapting to. So we will have to sit and or change the old legacy system of doing an assessment and change it to quantifying the risk and calculating the cost and time, rather than being subjective in nature and managing the and mitigating the issues. So that's my take here, Paul.
Yeah, I agree. It's back to that. If we try to make all of our controls right, is that going to save our risk? I mean, my favorite approach to sort of simplifying risk management starts with, what are we trying to achieve, i.e. our business objectives? What's the stuff that's going to trip us up along the way? And then what are we doing about it? And I think what you've just described is the real challenge, which is how do we optimize our control spend in order to take an acceptable level of risk in order to deliver our business outputs? And that becomes a really difficult challenge. Gaurav, is that your experience at the moment as well?
Yeah, I mean, just double clicking down into one of the details over here that is very important. What we see over here is absolutely what Kavitha and you talked about earlier, which is there is an over focus on controls without really understanding, the context as much. But I think there is also something higher level going on, and that higher level thing is boards and senior leaders are frustrated, and cybersecurity teams, cyber risk teams are exhausted. And then you double click down into that, there's a lack of alignment, and which is really, Paul, what to your point, and Kavitha, what you said earlier, is like, what's the context? What are we trying to do over here? And if you don't incorporate that context into our thinking, you have people talking past each other. And then there is also the other piece of it, which is cybersecurity, if you don't use things like automation, is an incredibly hard thing, right? The numbers are just, it's like, you're standing in front of rain at, like a hurricane, right? And trying to wade, bail out water, as the word goes, right? Bail out water using a bucket. It's going to be incredibly frustrating and exhausting. And that's what's really happening. So I think what we are seeing is that, at least what we've seen for the last couple of years at least, is that there is a recognition that something has to change, and we have to get better aligned, which is this idea of quantifying cyber risk. And we have to do that leveraging more and more over automation, machine learning, finding the best man-machine combination so that we can stay ahead of the risk.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so, I mean, I think what we've sort of described as this focus on controls, what do you see as the consequences of continuing to go down that route, Kavitha?
Right. So the practice that currently that majority of the organizations are doing is, whenever we do a risk assessment, and we approach the business functions, everybody come up with high. They want their own functions to be high rated, and irrespective of the loss of business or impact to the deliverables that they work on, they're not bothered about anything. All they are worried about is, my function is important and it has to be high always. And even when they are trying to formulate it using formulas, you are arriving at a medium or low, they go for exceptions. They want it to be high always, but failing to understand the reality of the consequence that a business has to face. The low priority ones becomes the high, and the high ones always can be outdated or not so important. So that that process needs to change. And how do you change it is definitely to adapting to a methodology which will quantify your risk, and there is no upgrading it or downgrading based on the numbers that it is coming out with. So that is one thing that I would definitely foresee where a change is required. And second, and we'll have to work together and have a comprehensive outlook rather than working in a solo model, right? Each and every group will come with a different point of views and different feedbacks on the current threat landscape that they are facing on a day-to-day basis. So we shouldn't be dependent or influenced by various sources that we are seeing. There has to be a dedicated team who knows the metrics very clearly, define their policies, standards in an effective manner, so that they are able to understand the reality and execute accordingly.
Balbix is sort of operating in this space and trying to bring that bring that level of objectivity. Would you like to describe how you bring that to play?
Yeah, so let me first just take a few minute or so to talk about the thesis behind Balbix and how we do it. So as we kind of talked about, there is a need for objectivity, there is a need for consistency, there is a need for better alignment, there is a need for leveraging machine learning and automation so that we can measure better and that can hopefully drive better outcomes. And that exactly is the mission of Balbix. So what we do is, what our platform does is it captures information from all of as many of your cybersecurity tools, the IT tools, and some of the business tools that may be already deployed, right? We just capture that same data, mountains of data, as they say, and we capture it we deduplicate it, we analyze it, clean it up, we analyze it, then we make it ready for inferencing. And then we basically using a risk model, which is something that we have built over the last 5 years with our customers. We calculate the impact, the potential impact, and likelihood of breach on an asset by asset, application by application basis, bottom up and top down, and bottom up and top down. And this process is happening continuously. Now, this unified risk model enables several use cases. And one of the most important use cases is enabling what we call cyber risk quantification, something that is useful for decision making, for reporting, for making decisions like, what's our acceptable risk and where are we, what's the risk tolerance, and then also the flip side of it, being able to use the same risk to prioritize what needs to get done. Because there are 10,000 things that need to get done. Not everything is equally important. So how do you take the left side, the business side of risk, the business enabled measurement of risk, and how do you use that to drive what you have to do by combining in cybersecurity context, business context, and an IT context? That's really what Balbix does.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different way of doing things. I mean, I'd like to just sort of pick your brains a small bit, Kavitha. I mean, I assume you've come across things like Balbix where you do risk quantification by understanding the environment first. There are quite a few other approaches which are, which try to quantify your risk exposure by your NIST scale or your control, based off of your control data, rather than really getting into the ones and noughts. Have you come across those? I mean, what's your experience in the sort of risk quantification domain at the moment?
Okay, so the most important benefit we can expect from cyber risk quantification is definitely the ability to scale, measure, and track the progress over time. It is, so far we have done, as I said, doing a risk assessment, doing an analysis, and the ratings are never going to help us. Some of the, areas that I feel, and definitely I recommend, is doing a risk quantification, to get the benefit out of business. And in that, first and foremost, I would say the team should define the scope. Define the scope, and I mean they'll have to know what are they, covering in this, while quantifying the risk. What is the expectations of the organization? What is their roadmap? Where do they want to reach in next 5 years? The complete planning should be defined, and they have to, be objective in nature to execute a cyber risk quantification exercise, that is well defined and established, not only to the execution team, but also to the senior management team, for them to be aware and to be, very intelligent in nature while taking a decision in the threat landscape or in the current digital era that we are growing. And other area that I definitely, re-emphasize is on prioritizing in the high risk areas. They shouldn't go by the subjective results that they get from the risk assessment, but they have to, look at the business risks and do a data analysis to quantify the risks, understand the type of risk that is prevailing in the environment, narrow the focus on the cyber threats, and focus on the highest damage to the organization and invest in the right place. We should talk it in numbers. The numbers play a key role in whichever table that you're going to sit in, because especially our business team or the CFOs specifically look for numbers. What are the numbers that you're talking about? How you quantify the cyber risk that we are facing, so that I'll be able to look upon, do we have to invest? Do we have that level of investment that can be made in this financial year or next financial? They'll be able to talk to us in the same language and be more interactive in nature or understandable only when we are going to talk in numbers.
Thanks, Kavitha. Gaurav, I can see you itching to come in there. I think you've got some points you'd like to raise. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, for those of you who love math and physics, there's like two theorems that I'll paraphrase over here, right? One which you already talked about: you can't improve what you can't measure. The second one, which is more interesting, is also true, and that is that in order to measure something, you must sample it at least at twice the frequency. This is a very fundamental theorem in information theory. If you want to improve a practice, you must measure it at twice the frequency at which it is changing. So since the mean time of arrival of new issues is 15 days, I think we need to measure it at least every week. And since it's the mean time, it's not the fastest time, I think we should measure it continuously. It can only be done with automation. It can only be done with automation. Automation of risk quantification, automation of making sure that we are compliant, not once a year and then subsequently non-compliant for the rest of the year.
There are two pieces to this. One is, what are you using your cyber risk quantification for? And I think what's come to my mind here is one is the element of, we really want to understand the return on our investment. So we want to be able to have a investment cycle based sort of cyber risk quantification. Although for me personally, I think being able to have a trend is a really useful piece here, because we don't want to be able to, if we did an annual assessment, catch ourselves in the trough between two peaks. And then the other piece is, or do you want to use it to help optimize your actual response to cyber risk in terms of optimize your patching or optimize your mitigating of those things that have been highlighted to you, or dealing with new threats that may or may not need new investment? They might just need targeted remediation.
Yes.
So what do we think the future is? I'll let Gaurav go first this time, and then I'll let Kavitha have the last word on that one.
Yeah, the future is good. And the reason why I say that is, they say the darkest hour is just before the first light, if you will. I think there is an increasing appreciation and understanding across the industry that status quo won't work. What is needed is automation. What is needed, I think, Paul, what you described earlier, and Kavitha, what you were talking about earlier, is exactly that. There are two signals, right? One signal is investment focused. The other signal is threat and IT and risk focused, cyber risk and external information focused. I think there's a broad recognition across the industry that that's happening. And people are, we've been doing this for a while, so I kind of can see the uptick in there. And I think what we expect to see is that more and more investment will happen that will enable organizations to automate, maximally automate, 85, 95% of what we do today in the cyber risk management function. And that will free up the human capital, the scarce human capital that we have today. And I'm sure we've all heard about the talent shortage, right, in this industry. So it'll free up that talent and the brain cycle to really think about the next move of the adversary. Right, this is not going to end. This is just going to become, we're just going to get some very good uptick on our tools, when we uptick on our capability once we start embracing automation across the industry.
Cool. Thanks, Gaurav. Kavitha, what are your thoughts about the future? Do you echo Gaurav's view that people are waking up to this?
Definitely, Paul, as you rightly said, the data that is stored in the organization day by day, it's increasing. It's humongous in nature. Not only the data, the technology is developing, the dependencies that we have across the table, not only internally, but externally also increasing day by day. So doing that, manually is out of question. That is not going to be a practical solution in near future. And quantifying the risk is something which is very important. There is no time for people to read documents, plans and procedures to accept and justify or approve our plans. They want to see numbers. I don't have time. You just show me numbers, where the investment required and what level of investment is required, and what we need to procure and enable will be decided based on the numbers and not based on the stories or subjective areas that you have come up with. So that's going to be the never-ending story, Paul.
So I think what I've heard today is, we've got to move away from a subjective approach that focuses on controls and isn't really optimizing for our business, to a more objective approach to delivering cyber risk quantification that the business and the board can understand. But that's not really the end of the story, is it, Gaurav?
Yeah, that's a great point you make, right? In my experience with senior leaders, right? I mean, visibility, quantification, these things are interesting and important, but only to a point, right? Because they tell you what's broken. They help you understand what's broken. But the real value comes from what they enable, which is ultimately better risk management and lower risk. They just don't want to get breached. Nobody wants to get breached. And there is some magic when you can put a number to things. First of all, it aids in understanding. But then once you put a number to things and have what's right next to it is a series of actions, a way to prioritize, now magic starts happening. People start competing. You can be objective about their progress. People get feedback, and that feedback loop starts. And at the end of it is a much better cybersecurity posture. And I think that's really what we're looking at over here with better cyber risk quantification.
And I can see actually the point that Gaurav made there. If you have different divisions and they're not only got the number of what their exposure is, but they've got the prioritization on how to solve it. You could see how a little bit of gamification could come into play there, and people competing to have the better level of output in a shorter period of time by focusing on dealing with the things that's going to change that number. We just need to be very, very confident in our algorithms, but that's a good thing too. Well, thank you, Gaurav. Thanks, Kavitha, for joining me today and having a great discussion about cyber risk quantification, something that should be on every board's agenda for the coming weeks and months.